We've got Lauren Levey, so welcome, Lauren. And we've also got Bianco, who is here but not going to be showing her face. And so I will introduce both of them and then hand over to you. So Lauren Levey and Bianco, they are in WDI USA Lesbian Caucus, and they're going to talk about their statement on marriage. Lauren Levey has been on the board of WDI USA nearly continuously since its inception. She coordinates its state legislative advocacy team and its Lesbian Caucus. Lauren also coordinates Lesbian Bill of Rights International, LBORI, which is an international network of radical feminist lesbian organizations. And Bianco is a member of the WDI Lesbian Caucus. She is, when she's not being, an incorrigible nuisance to dinner party conversations everywhere. She's a writer and lifelong feminist hailing from awkward lib fem beginnings to finding purpose in radical feminism's focus on systemic oppression and sex-based rights. She can generally be found somewhere dangerous, doing something particularly hilariously badly and having the most fun. Her particular areas of interest, apart from obviously lesbian issues, include women's community building in the modern information age, backwards engineering patriarchal socialization, and general disorder. Casey joined the board of WDI USA in August 2025. So welcome, Lauren and Casey, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Joe, and hi, everybody. So before we launch into our discussion today about marriage, I'll just give you some quick background on the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus. I created the Lesbian Caucus for the US chapter in 2022 because the board would sometimes ask the two lesbians on the board at that time for an ad hoc lesbian position on something. And I wanted us to be consistent with ourselves over time and also to be consistent with radical feminist principles. So the first thing the caucus did was write the Lesbian Bill of Rights, or the LBOR, which has since been adopted by 6 other radical feminist lesbian organizations across the world. You can read the LBOR on the WDI USA website and on the websites of other organizations that have adopted it. The WDI USA website is womensdeclaration-usa.com. Since its founding, the Lesbian Caucus has collectively written a number of articles that we're very proud of, including a chapter in an upcoming book titled I Wish I Was a Lesbian, edited by Angela Wild. It will be published by Spinifex Press in 2026. Our included essay is titled, Is Lesbian Political Potential Impacted by the Doctrine of Born That Way? Born that way refers to the belief that sexual orientation is innate, and spoiler alert, we're not buying it. Other projects created by the Lesbian Caucus include our lesbian coming out groups, an upcoming lesbian and bisexual women's discussion group, and our lesbian business listings. Lesbian business listings is an international listing of lesbian-owned businesses with name, contact information, and thumbnail description of the goods or services offered for sale. I encourage you to check it out on the WDI USA website and consider filling out the application form to add your own business if you're a lesbian. The Lesbian Caucus currently has 4 members: Catherine Kinney, Mary Ellen Kelleher, Casey Bianco, who will be speaking here today, and myself as coordinator. If you're a lesbian and a radical feminist and you're in the US and you think you might like to join the Lesbian Caucus, you can get in touch with me by emailing info@womensdeclaration-usa.com and we'll have a chat. In 2023, the Lesbian Caucus created the Lesbian Bill of Rights International, or LBORI, which is a network of radical feminist lesbian organizations, now with 7 members in 6 countries. LBORI is currently writing an article about the international attack by governments on free speech and how it affects women generally and lesbians in particular. You can find articles written by the Lesbian Caucus and articles by El Bori on the WDI USA website. And most of them are also on the El Bori website, which is lborinternational.com. Today, Casey and I will be discussing the Lesbian Caucus's latest article, which lays out our position on marriage. I'll read it and then we can discuss it. The article starts by quoting the Elbor. Resolved that lesbians have the right to make private domestic agreements with their sexual partners that are as enforceable as any other contract without having to enter into a state-defined marriage. Resolved that lesbians have the right to be free from discrimination in adopting children. Resolved that lesbians have the right to be free from sex stereotypes in all forms and to present and express nonconformity to sex-based stereotypes without discrimination or other interference. So, is marriage in the interests of lesbians, of any women? And if not, can the institution of marriage be reformed and redeemed? These questions were recently brought to the attention of the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus by a media report describing a request for the US Supreme Court to revisit the question of same-sex marriage and restrict or prohibit it. The Supreme Court had ruled in 2015 that marriage between two men or two women was permissible and on an equal footing legally with heterosexual marriage. That was Obergefell v. Hodges. In 2022, Congress codified the right to same-sex marriage into federal law, and that was the Respect for Marriage Act. And at that time, 2022, we wrote in response, while not addressing the pros and cons of the institution of marriage in general, WDI USA and the Lesbian Caucus support the rights of same-sex couples to participate in marriage as it exists in the law on an equal basis with all other couples, end quote. So in the present article, the Lesbian Caucus will do what we declined to do in 2022. We will address the pros and cons of the institution of marriage for women and for lesbians in particular. Marriage, as we know it, is one of the most ancient institutions of patriarchy, that is, the universal power of all men over all women. It was created by societies that treated women as men's property that would be exchanged for money, goods, or a peace treaty between warring tribes of men. This fundamental exchange between the bride's father and the groom or his father did not change with the medieval rise of knights, chivalry, troubadours, and romantic love. In fact, an elopement done without the transaction of the patriarchs was seen as theft, just as rape was, a property crime against the victim's father or husband in the case of rape. Even as women slowly won certain human rights of their own, married women remained a man's property in crucial ways. The Married Women's Property Acts, starting in 1839 in the US, began to chip away at men's absolute ownership and control of women, state by state and piece by piece. US women only won the federal right to vote in 1920. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act first provided women with equal access to loans in 1974. And marital rape was not recognized as a crime in every state until 1993. Marriage was created by men as one of the primary pillars of patriarchy for the purpose of ensuring that every man has a sex slave, a caretaker, and a producer of heirs. A woman's consent was a modern and occasional afterthought at best. A woman is even stripped of her name when she is assimilated as the husband's property. Marriage has been normalized, eroticized, and enforced by brute force, religion, custom, romantic lore, and the law. It is apparent that the isolation of women from each other and from their blood relatives into nuclear families, with one woman under the control of one man and his social structures, was a crucial element that aided the enforcement of systematic male domination. A relationship based on equality between women is fundamentally inconsistent with the patriarchal structure and purposes of marriage. The nuclear family model that serves to isolate the wife from family and community so that her husband can be assured that his heirs share his DNA simply doesn't translate comfortably into either egalitarian lesbian relationships or thriving lesbian community. Women's Declaration International works to eliminate violence against women and harms to children, as described in Articles 8 and 9 of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. But it is difficult for us to imagine how we can eliminate those harms within an institution like marriage, which exists with the explicit intention of isolating women and children under the control of a man. The ethics of nuclear family ideology encourage us to regard what happens behind closed doors as private and none of our concern, and that is the man's domain where he may abuse his wife and children as he sees fit. A man's home is his castle, and so forth. Men within the nuclear family unit continue to be by far the most dangerous men to women. About 60% of sexual attacks on women occur inside a residence. This is not surprising because it is where men reasonably feel most confident in their power, and isolation gives them plausible deniability in the absence of disinterested witnesses. Marriage is fundamentally anti-community and anti-woman structure, and we think it can never provide reliable safety and support to women and children. Additionally, the financial benefits men gain from marriage will never be accessible to lesbians in a marriage. Married men dramatically out-earn every other demographic, in large part because men are willing to wield their social power to push the wife to do the lion's share of domestic and childcare labor. This is true even when she's employed. The net result of being married is that her income benefits his social status, his career, and his income while reducing her own. Patriarchal ideology cynically promotes wifely love and devotion in order to obtain the wifely submission that enables the extraction of free labor. As radical feminist lesbians, we want egalitarian relationships in which both women receive a net benefit from the relationship. Even if some lesbians wish to emulate the heterosexual marriage model, they lack the social and institutional power and support to financially exploit a female power in the ways a man can. Married lesbian couples have a higher divorce rate than either gay male couples or heterosexual couples. Theories attempting to explain that disparity have been advanced, mostly blaming lesbian behavior or lesbian culture. But such explanations assume that marriage is desirable and beneficial, and that therefore lesbians should adapt to its requirements for success. While we think there are areas where lesbians might benefit from self-reflection to achieve better communities, better relationships, and better political effectiveness, we think that marriage is not one of these. Arguments in favor of marriage based on difficulties in exercising rights or taking charge of one's own legal affairs without marriage fail. For instance, inheritance, retirement funding, health proxy, because those problems only exist in the first place because of marriage. The red tape that unmarried people face in these areas has been intentionally created by institutions including government, religion, and biological family, that aim to force women to marry by making it challenging to organize their affairs as they wish outside of marriage. So can marriage be reformed or otherwise redeemed? We don't think so. Marriage was recently cited by a panel of men organized by U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth as a tool to rescind the right of married women to vote. The idea was to allow just one vote per family, with the one voter to be the head of household, meaning, of course, the husband. Such notions are built-in features of marriage, only temporarily held at bay by the continual work of feminists. Reverting to the effective enslavement of women over 100 years ago is way too easy, given the history and structure of marriage and its supporting patriarchal institutions. The renewed promotion of trad wives is a current example of easy backsliding. Sheila Jeffries has observed that women need to campaign for the best possible outcome and not hold back. This means, and I quote, "You may get some of what you want for starters, but in the end, you may get everything. That is why I am always an abolitionist rather than a regulationist. Evil has to be abolished and not regulated," end quote. It's for this reason that we advocate abolishing marriage rather than trying yet again to make it less harmful. Prior to the misguided decision by gay men, bisexuals, and some lesbians to attempt to assimilate into straight culture, second-wave lesbian feminists were highly critical of marriage, understanding it as an exploitive institution and rightly uncomfortable with the state as a secret third party, sort of secret third party, to what should be a private agreement between lovers. The decision to assimilate was championed beginning in the 1970s, primarily by gay men who believed it would enable them to access all the rights and political and social influence that was enjoyed by straight men. It was like, see, we're just exactly like straight couples, except for this one insignificant difference. Right. So marriage equality may have accomplished that assimilation for some gay men, but it has provided no benefit to lesbians or other women. On the contrary, it is our judgment that efforts to reform or equalize marriage are misguided. All marriage needs to be abolished in favor of private, enforceable agreements between the parties. We think a movement for the universal abolition of marriage is long overdue. We need completely new family structures that center women from the outset, not ancient structures designed to protect men's property, including women, which are structures that isolate women from each other's protection, friendship, affection, and mutual aid. The new structures will need to work for both lesbians and heterosexual women, as well as their girl children. So that's the statement of the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus. Now let's go over to Casey Bianco, who is a member of the Lesbian Caucus and one of the authors of this statement. Casey will briefly discuss what kinds of structures we might create in place of the nuclear family and how they might work better for women and girls. And we invite your own ideas and participation in the chat or in the question box. Casey.
Yeah, Lauren, I'm going to keep your video on because we're not seeing Casey, so just so you know, you'll be on as well.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. So I think the first thing that I really want to establish before we get into any of this and have discussion about it is that I think we really need to talk about the idea that for most women, a nuclear family isn't a community to begin with. So rather than looking at this as a conversation about what we're giving up in an attempt to move to something else, we need to look at it as a conversation of how do we create this thing that we don't actually have? Because, in the article we wrote about how the nuclear family is isolationist and how it becomes sort of this domain where what happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors, and it creates an environment that is perfect for abuse. And it's also extremely small, often too small to support the people living in it. It's actually very hard for just two adults to care for a child, let alone multiple children. In sort of more traditional pre-patriarchy communities, you would have a lot more shared labor between adults. So the nuclear family isn't a community in a way that's fulfilling for most adults. A lot of married people are quite lonely and have a lot of difficulty keeping up with all the things they need to do because they lack outside support. So with that in mind, we should look at other types of community as something we gain, not something we're having to trade in the nuclear family to have, because the nuclear family isn't adequate for most people to begin with. And there's a lot of different potential structures, some of which women have already explored on women's lands and lesbian lands. Many of them are, rural spaces where groups of women live together. There have been urban versions of that, co-living, and some of those still exist, although many of the ones I know of are mixed sex. And something that we talked about as being important is refocusing on centering the community as being at least as important and maybe more important than an individual romantic couple. Um, and the reason for that is that building community is for the benefit and safety and resources of everybody. Um, and if participation in community is contingent only on it being convenient to your romantic relationship at the time, then it reduces the community back down to that much more isolated model that doesn't serve women's needs as well. So we'd really like there to be a lot more conversation about more communal styles of living, or even just mutual aid networks of women exclusively. Um, and we understand that there are women who won't want to make that jump, but we believe that the abolishment of marriage benefits all women, including those women who want to continue to live in a nuclear household sort of structure, just by making it more accessible to them to delegate their affairs the way that they see fit without having to beg permission of the government. Um, the only thing that abolishing marriage would do is remove barriers and create options. It does not add them or take them away. Um, so those are really kind of the jumping off points that I wanted to give. I want to talk about this as kind of a sliding scale, knowing that different women have different things that they're willing or able to do, and they live in different environments. There's a sliding scale from women continue living in a nuclear family, but now they have more legal freedom, all the way up to these new systems of community that we could build when we have more legal freedom to partition our affairs the way that we want without needing any permission to do so. Are we going to get like questions through the Q&A, or are we kind of just going to have people talk?
There aren't any questions in the Q&A. I'll put
Cool.
my video on as well. So there aren't any questions in the Q&A, but there have been quite a lot of comments, and
Yes.
uh, so those perhaps we could pick up a couple of them. That's quite quite a lot of people saying that's very useful and good statement, and then discussion about well, I mean, one sort of counter comment, or sort of saying that one of the reasons why some lesbians are currently still still sort of aligned with marriage or still support marriages. Some lesbians feel strongly that their love is recognized by the government and society by their marriage. And then somebody else was mentioning about pensions and
Mm.
access to medical records. What would you say, sort of why is that happening and why what's a response to those things?
Well, pensions and things like that, the benefits, the so-called benefits of marriage, or the presumed historic benefits of marriage, I don't want to admit here, but can nearly all be replicated with the use of a handful, or maybe two handfuls, less than 10, fewer than 10 legal documents that on up very simply. I mean, they can be made complicated, but they can be, they're basically boilerplate um, uh, contract type things, or powers of attorney, a simple will, write your own additional instructions to the will, a list of property, stuff like that. Name a healthcare proxy. You know, those kinds of things can be drawn up easily and rather cheaply, and they can give you those protections even now, even where marriage looms large in every society. And those are some ways of, you can contract your way around that.
And I think it's also important to point out, like, in this theoretical future society, there would be, you know, these handful, maybe up to 10 sort of boilerplate legal contracts that you could pretty much just sign and probably pay a small fee for, the same way that you do a marriage license. The difference would be, A, you would have more control over exactly what you signed up for, and B, there is no litmus test about whether you're allowed to sign up for it. That's the big issue. You know, our proposal is not that you know, partners should stop having the ability to partition their legal rights amongst each other. It's that the government should not have a say in whether they are permitted to do that.
There's also the issue of respect, part of the question. Whether lesbians want their relationships, apparently lesbians want their relationships respected by society as sort of personified by the government. Lesbians' relationships are not respected. Marriage or no marriage, their marriages are not respected. That, I mean, we that's you know, when a lesbian says "my wife," everybody snickers. That's not going to be solved by patriarchal.
Or who's the man in the relationship? There's another fun one.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big thing, isn't it?
Hmm.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our time of feminist question time, and we spent a lot of time hearing from Drisha and Victoria, which was completely brilliant because I think it's the first time that Drisha has been on feminist question time. It was absolutely brilliant to spend a lot of time hearing about that. It would be nice to get you two back on and continue this discussion because I think we could unpick quite a few more issues. And I've certainly got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask, but I think let's leave it if it's possible, maybe because I know the Lesbian Caucus in the USA is quite active and you're doing quite a bit. So maybe in a couple of months we could get you back on.